All right, we need to know a little bit more about Python, JSON, and Yang, and they are not brothers, believe it or not. Well, find out more right here on IT Pro TV.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
We are jumping into a little bit of programming and automation here, and here, of course, to help us out in understanding Python, JSON, and Yang, well, it's Anthony Segura. All right, Anthony, I tease, they're not really brothers, because it sounds like the beginning of a story of three brothers here.
Yes.
And we should tell a joke about it, but we're not going to. Anthony, where are we going to begin?
Well, I love the brothers thing, that concept, because they're so related.
Right.
And they're used together so much. And also, as Ronnie was doing our teaser introduction there, I realized we should have switched sides of the podium for this episode. We only did it once in Encore, at least the initial episodes that we shot. Oh, twice? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We could have done it again. Ronnie knows more than I do about this because Ronnie co-taught the Cisco DevNet program here at IT Pro TV. So he delved deeper into this than we need to at the Encore level, but I'll try and make Ronnie proud. We spoke of Yang. Do you remember when? It was when we were talking about netconf and restconf. And I said, I promise I'll show you an example. You're going to see this paradigm in use again and again and again, and that is that we're going to be defining objects for our programmability and our automation, and we are going to be using a very human readable form for that. This is Yang syntax, and look at how incredibly readable this is, even by a programming noob like me. Container, we're creating a container object named interfaces. We're gonna list interface. The key is called name. The description is then provided. We have a container for interface state. Can we configure it? No. So this is clearly something that we're coding where we don't want, or let me back up. The interface state can't be configured.
Right.
It can't be, because we know interface state is something that dynamically happens on the device that we are just looking at here. And then we have the key of name once again in the description. Now, what does get tricky about something like the Yang model is until you learn all the little rules about like where you need semicolons and where you need your quotes and where you need your curly braces, that's the only tricky part. Now, the good news is that the only data representation format that Cisco is gonna probably hammer you on is JSON, because JSON is becoming so incredibly ubiquitous, and it really is a very easy syntax to work with. They'll probably hammer you a bit on that. So let's do JSON next and spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, so before we move on to JSON
Sure,
here,
sure.
let's talk about Yang for a moment, because a lot of times people go, all right, so is this a language that I'm programming in? It's not really a language that you're programming in. This is more of what we call a data format that we are going to be using. So this is a little bit different than what we think about. Let's take an example of a switch, for example,
Sure.
if we were to do this, right? So when we program a switch, right, I type in interface and then, the port number that I want, then I do the configuration, IP address, I do all that stuff. When it stores it on the switch, it stores it as that text file, right? It's actually that descriptive, but it's actually one gigantic file that it stores it in. The way that Yang ends up working as a data format is it takes each of those individual pieces and it stores it separately. And the reason behind that is so that we can put that in that Yang data model, and then multiple interface types that we choose can actually go in and say, hey, I can pull that information, I can do this. So it's not only accessible from something like the command line, this is now accessible from APIs that are out there. This is accessible from Python that's calling upon an API. And then we can use things like the netconf and the restconf that can actually help, because it says, oh, That's a Yang data model. I can transport that in, and then I can display it the way that it needs to. So this is a fairly universal format that we should at least understand, that it's the idea of being more descriptive in what it actually has access to and what we have access to, instead of the other way, which is really, you see everything, right? It's the programming, it's the description of the interface, and then IP address, you have all that stuff in here. But each one of those components can be separated out, and the storage of it is what makes it kind of unique in what we do. So by doing this, now when we start talking about the other things we're about to talk about, Python and JSON and all that, it can actually pull all that information and display it in JSON. We can then access it through Python, and that's kind of the neat thing about this Yang data model.
Ronnie, that was the best explanation of the Yang data model that I have ever heard, and
no.
I sure wish I had heard it before I walked in the door. Great stuff. And you know, one thing that it made me think of, Ronnie, is that the way we used to try and do what Ronnie described with Yang was simple network management protocol. And SNMP MIB with that big, ugly tree and all that, that was just not friendly. And we saw the example of the Yang model in action there, and it was super friendly.
Right.
And speaking of super friendly, an alternative to XML. XML, I promised you an example, but just do this for me because I forgot I promised you an example of XML. Just go to Google and just do XML example if you've never seen XML. It used to be celebrated as this way to give data to something that was human readable. Well, let's take a look at JSON because it outdoes the XML approach big time. Look at this. We have the curly brackets opening and closing surrounding what's called a JSON object, and it is router. And by the way, I made up some silly examples here just to be Cisco centric, but they're just silly. So don't pay too much attention to that. But router is the name, and the value that's associated with that is this name parameter, and it's R1, a string value, a ID parameter, and it's a value 30, location, and it's a value New York. Now, notice the curly braces inside the curly braces there. We are taking an object and nesting it in another object. I wish I had started with the more simplistic example. I apologize, but a lot of times what you're going to have as an object is router and then like R1.
Right.
You know, so you have this whole concept of this key and this value, this key and this value, this key and this value. That's how this works.
And we want to pay attention to that colon for separating out that key value.
Yes, the colon is the separator for the key and the value. In fact, Ronnie, thank you, because we need to cover this in more depth, because I told you, if you get hammered on syntax, it would be here. So let's back up the truck. Opening and closing parens. Then we've got our quotes, and notice they're around the key.
Right.
And then the colon to give the value. And then in this one, we did something cool. We did an object nesting. So we have this name key and a value of R1. Notice the comma. Don't forget that. And then we have the ID, no quotes around it because it's a numeric, 30. And then our loc for location, New York, and that's a string. Quotes go around the string values. We close off the curly braces because that's the end of that object. And then I give you a different example down below. Opening and closing curly braces. Switches is the key. The colon indicates a value, and then we suddenly get a new character. It's the open and closed square brackets. This is for an array. When you have multiple values for the same key, we have an array, and the array here is string values of switch 1, switch 2, switch 3. Now, we are doing the JSON all on one line, which is permitted and is often like machine friendly. The machine's like, yeah, just give it to me all in one line. But understand that your JSON is even more readable when you break it up like I've done here. But note, all of the syntax rules that we've covered still apply. So notice I've got the same open and closing, curly braces around objects. I've got the quotations. I've got the colons. I've got the commas.
They have to be important.
Rodney
Yeah.
and I had a formatting mishap in one of our YouTube episodes, and the commas got deleted.
Yeah.
And we had to, big shout out to our producer, Courtney, who was able to fix that without us having to reshoot the whole app.
Add commas.
Yeah, about the commas. Yep. So notice that even though we've made it more human readable, all the ingredients still have to be there. Here I've got name, string R1, ID, value of 30, new. Oh, look at that. A Boolean, another data type.
Yep.
So there's this key of new, and it's true or false, and that's a Boolean. And then switches, look at this. I was trying to be tricky here. It's not an array. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Switches is not fed an array. The opening curly brace and closing curly brace there show me that I'm doing another one of those object nesting deals.
Right.
And switches has nested inside it switch 1, string Tampa, switch 2, string Orlando, switch 3, Miami. That's not an array of values for one key. That's a whole bunch of key value, key value, key value. So spend some time with this. If you've never worked with it, as I said, don't be surprised if you get hammered on this a little bit in your exam. And Ronnie, you wanted to point something out here, I think.
Right. So be careful as well as you end something like this. So notice Miami does not have a closing comma. It's easy for them to add one in there
and say what's wrong.
So
Cool.
you might go, Cisco wouldn't do that. They might.
They
so
could, yeah.
So just kind of realize that on that last entry that you see there, you probably aren't going to see commas. So even though that looks a little bit strange that you see it after Tampa, after Orlando, you don't see one after Miami, you're probably like, oh, no, one needs to be there, but it really doesn't. Yep.
Yeah, very cool. By the way, when you learn your JSON, you're not going to be just leveraging Cisco technologies. You know where I first learned JSON? Like 5 years ago? Amazon Web Services. Yep. I was writing in JSON to provide information to the AWS infrastructure. So this is not just Cisco stuff that we're studying. And it's always nice when you can learn something and then get a lot of value from what you have learned. Well, we wrap it up with Python. You know, it's amazing how things change. For the longest time, I started my whole computer passion with programming. It's amazing that I'm not a programmer because that's where I started with technology, and it was a huge passion of mine when I was 14. And I'm being serious. So many, many years ago, I was bitten by the developer, the coder bug. It's amazing I didn't go that route. I was so passionate about it. Back then, it was COBOL or something. And then for the longest time, everyone was telling me that C and C#, that was the stuff to learn. And then for the longest time, it became Java was the thing to learn. And what's the thing to learn right now? Ask 100 developers, and I have. What's the thing to learn? 98 of them are going to say Python. It is the new programming language of choice. It is a low barrier to entry. It's quite human readable. It does do things that hark back to C and all those kind of more sophisticated languages, if you will. It is taking the world by storm. And I just wanted to show you some of it here, just so you can get a sense for its readability and to show you how it can go in and automate for you very, very efficiently these operations you might want to be performing. Here we're doing a show ARP across a whole bunch of devices, and then we are putting that output on screen in a nicely formatted way. And I can't emphasize it enough. Python is taking the world by storm. And I just remembered something I wanted to tell you about why. It's because of its flexibility. We network engineers love it. Gamers are writing in it. I mean, it is just so multi-purpose. It can be used for a quick script, or it can be used to write something like Ansible. Ansible, and we'll talk about it in the upcoming episode, is a skill that I possess. I, learned Ansible inside and out to do some consulting. And Ansible, that miraculous product, that's overstating it, that cool product, it's written in Python.
Right.
So very flexible.
Yeah, so if we go back to the example that Anthony showed us for a moment, let's put this in context.
Are you going to show off
No.
now? Are you going to flex your coding muscle?
No, I'm really not. So let's put things in context.
Sure.
Because if you're like me, CCNA, you're like, that looks like a whole lot more, Anthony, at this point, than me going to CLI and typing in show ARP.
Yep.
Okay. So all of a sudden I'm sitting here like, why would I choose to do this?
That is a great point.
Yeah.
Why not just type 2 words instead of
show
type
ARP.
all this?
And the first understanding that I had of the power behind it is what you said during this, and I want to make sure that everybody heard it too, is that you no longer have to actually do that if I have 50 switches. Okay. So Anthony, does that sound fun, going to 50 switches and typing in show ARP? I don't think that's fun. As much as I like typing in the CLI, if we can learn this, okay, now we can actually have all 50 of those switches send us the output of that by using something like this. And that's what I want to do, is make sure that we set the context to understand the idea of the efficiency behind Python.
I am trying to do a trick that you taught me.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the Zoom trick.
There you go.
There is magic in this Python, and it exists right there, line 2.
Mm-hmm.
For a underscore device in all underscore devices. That's the magic. You can be doing this show ARP that you need for some reason across thousands of devices and having that output running. And that's the magic.
Yeah, not only in one place, but across your entire cloud if you needed to, which again...
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. This is a code snippet that Ronnie and I pulled from this dev guy and network engineer guy. And what he was after here was the ability to get this across not only thousands of devices, but from a whole bunch of different vendors.
Right.
And so Python begins to really shine. There's a bunch of code not shown here that is for all of the different vendors, right? But this is the Cisco specific, because show ARP we recognize as a Cisco command. So, boy, you just can't overstate the power of this.
All right, Anthony. Well, thank you again for at least helping us to walk through a few more examples here when we start talking about Yang, and of course the idea of Python here. And we also talked about JSON in this episode as well. All those are actually going to be very important as your networking career continues. The reason why is that the world is heading that way, so you want to at least get a little bit more knowledge in that. Make sure you dive in. And if you don't have a good resource for this, our recommendation, go ahead and go to Cisco's DevNet site. You can sign up for free, and they have a lot of great information that will help you to get started, at least get your feet wet in the concepts that we've been talking about here, and get a bit more understanding. Well, that will do it for this episode then. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm your host, Ronnie Wong.
And I'm Anthony Sequeira.
Stay tuned right here for more of your CCNP Encore show.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.